We've integrated data journalists into the Ihaka Lectures right from the beginning, one of the first talks in the first year, because data journalism is where the biggest impact of data analysis and visualization on the wider community is. We might think we're better at it or not, but we don't get the audience. So even if we were as good as the data journalists, it wouldn't help. So there's a lot to be said for a big audience and the ability to talk to a big audience. We don't get trained as much in talking to people who aren't statisticians, and we might get trained in graphics for communication, but we don't get trained in how to make displays that actually look good and get the right reactions from people. So our speaker tonight is Farah Hancock, who is a data journalist and long-form journalist with Radio New Zealand, or RNZ as we're supposed to call it nowadays. She started off as a design, and so that is a great background for the visual aspect of data journalism and communication, and then switched into journalism and ended up in data journalism. She's now at Radio New Zealand, but her work has been published at all the other sites you're probably thinking of, the Herald stuff, Newsroom, News Hub, One News, all the best places in New Zealand, and I think, what was it, BirdLife Daily as well? So Farah will be talking to us about putting feelings into figures, and I will welcome her to give her talk.
Thank you so much, Thomas. It's so good to be here, and thank you for coming. I'm just amazed. Look at all these faces. I am going to start off with sharing a little confession. I'm really, really bad with numbers. I'm terrible at numbers. I have such imposter syndrome standing up here because I'm not good at numbers. And as Thomas said, my training is in design and journalism. And before I had this midlife crisis career change to becoming a reporter, I actually worked in advertising. So I was in advertising for a good 10 plus years. I don't actually want to think about how long. So that's sort of my background. I've always been in communicating, whether it's visually or with words or both. And I've always thought about trying to make things easy to understand and stick in people's minds. But being terrible with numbers doesn't mean that I hate numbers. Journalists actually love numbers because they give us evidence. So sometimes you might hear some politician going, I've been going up and down the country and I've heard from the constituents and this is the story they're telling me. And you kind of go as a journalist, really? Really? Okay, let's check out the facts. So numbers can help you dig into things and find the truth. And you can, maybe their anecdotes are right or maybe they're wrong, but it's always, the data can help you tell the truth. So you're generally terrible with numbers, but we rely on them a lot. And I think I sort of mentioned this before, but I see my strength in data journalism because I know I'm terrible with numbers, but my strength is translating numbers into something people can understand and making them easy to understand. And I know probably a lot of you in this room, you could look at a table of numbers and it could almost tell you a story. You'd look at it and go, oh, the trend's going that way. There's lots of us who can't do that. And that's what, I'm one of those. So I need a picture to help understand the story those numbers are telling. And even if I read an article where there's a lot of numbers in it, I find it all fuzzes in my brain. I need to see a picture. And there are a lot of people like me who are very visual. So I did say it was about feelings. Let's talk about feelings. When you use emotion, and comes back to my advertising days, this is something we use a lot. So emotion can help make things resonate with an audience. You can make a sort of personal connection And making a personal connection, whether it's through anger or sadness or happiness, fear, that can help make things stick in your brain a lot better than just a fact without any feeling or emotion. You can create empathy with emotion too. And I tried to find some data or studies to back up my claim of this. I found something from a university. I didn't actually find the studies I was looking for, but it says stories that are personal and emotionally compelling engage more of the brain and thus are better remembered than simply stating a series of facts. And to show you sort of an example, I want to look at this is the road toll. So if you look at 2023, there were 341 people who died on our roads, which is pretty shocking. But it's just a fact. I mean, if you walked out of this room and I asked you next week how many people died on the roads, you probably wouldn't remember. But what advertisers do is they try to engage you with emotion. Now, they're not making you remember this number, but they're making you remember to be safe on the roads. So we all know this ad, hopefully, which uses humour to try and drive home a message about not drink driving and not getting killed. A more recent one is this. I don't know if you've seen it. It's quite awful. It's sort of this bleak scene, and this guy's driving along a country road, and suddenly out of nowhere there's a toll booth, and this person says, he says, "What's the toll?" And she says, "Just the little one today," pointing to the child in the back seat. And that's very emotive. I mean, if you look at some of the ways they've tried to make that emotive, they've used colour. I mean, the whole ad is kind of dreary. It gives you the sense of dread and unease, and that's trying to push the road to zero deaths message. So you can see advertising uses emotion a lot to help push, not so much facts, but to make things stick in your mind. There's another quote I picked up years ago, which I love, which is, "Statistics are human beings with the tears wiped away." I think it came about from asbestos deaths. I'm not entirely sure. But sometimes I think it's my job as a journalist to put those tears back on and to make people really feel those statistics and make it matter to them. You'll notice there's a big asterisk in there. And here's my caveat point. As a journalist, a lot of my job is not to involve any emotion and to just give the facts. So I won't add emotion to everything. A lot of the stuff I do is just keep it, just the facts, ma'am. But there are times when emotion is called for and it's fine to use emotion. And I want to take you through a couple of projects. One project, I did try to pull a lot of emotion in, and the other one I just tried to pull more of a vibe in with my visualisation. So the first one was about our endemic species. So endemic is species that are found only in New Zealand, nowhere else in the world. And we're losing a lot of them. So a lot of them are threatened, they're extinct. There's a lot we just don't know anything about. So I looked at this and I said, look, our problem is we're losing endemic species, but people don't seem to care. We know this. There's been plenty of stories about the loss of our endemic species, but nobody seems to care. So I was thinking, how can I make it hit home? How can I tell this in a different way that might make some people pick up and sit up and take notice? And fabulously, there's an incredible database called the New Zealand Threat Classification System. You can download it. It's actually in a beautiful, clean form. It's really nice to work with. So I was lucky that the data exists. And I'm really bad at coding, by the way. Everything I do with R is learnt from Stack Overflow. Pretty much. I've taught myself. So I could see in there, I'll just point, that line's at-risk species, that's data deficient. So if it's data deficient, we don't know much about it. We may not even be able, we may have found one and never found another, so we just don't know about it. There's extinct, introduced. That other big line is not threatened, so that's okay. And then there's the threatened line at the end. So when you add up all the ones that may be in trouble, it's way more than the not threatened. And then I looked around for inspiration, and this is beautiful. So this is about mountain gorillas. I've just put it in an animated GIF, and what they did is every dot is supposed to represent a gorilla, and they're trying to show over time the population change. So back in the 1900s, there was 5,000, then it dropped to, what was it, waiting, 800, and then it increased again. I thought this is quite a really evocative way of showing loss. I really loved how they executed it too. I mean, the eyes, they've made bigger, so they've kind of messed with things a bit. They've decided very artfully where to remove the dots and the size of the dots and the opacity of some dots. But anyway, it's a beautiful piece. So then I was going, okay, well, coming back to the problem I was trying to solve, I kind of hit on the thing that our flora and fauna and fungi in New Zealand form part of our national identity. I mean, we've got the kiwi, we've got the silver fern, we've got all these things that make it us. I mean, whenever we show New Zealand, we show a beautiful scenery with pure New Zealand with waterfalls and mountains and trees and plants. So I decided the strategy was to show our icons vanishing. For some reason, I hit on art straight away. And there was this fabulous artist called Ray Hammond. He's passed away now. And he did some very iconic pieces of art. I really liked his stuff. And I knew it resonated with I think in the 1970s, you would have found his prints on a lot of New Zealand walls. There was one I happened to have. I picked it up in an op shop. And so I played, this is really ugly, by the way, and this never made the light of day. This is the first time anyone outside RNZ has seen it. I was just doing it as a proof of concept of trying to go, okay, well, what if I pulled things out of our landscape? And then I actually got in touch with his estate. He'd passed away, and with his granddaughter, and I asked for permission to use this particular image, which is one of his more famous, one of huia, which are extinct. They gave me permission, so I'm just going to scroll down so you can see what I did with it. So I used some data and I started highlighting things. This is like a scroll effect on our website. Lichens, love lichens. And then I left it with this empty screen so you can sort of see the gaping holes. Sorry. Okay, so that was my hero image done, but there's more. That wasn't really data. It was a little bit, and there is facts, but then I had to go, how do I communicate more of that data? And I didn't have a bottomless photography budget. We're RNZ, we're taxpayer funded. We have a photographer, but there wasn't any way I was going to be sent up and down the country with a photographer to find threatened species and take photographs. But there were lots of beautiful public domain and Creative Commons images that I could use. So I did a bit of a search, and some of them are incredible. We're so lucky that there's been these illustrators who've done beautiful things. The other one, like in the bottom corner of the bug, is Landcare, and they Creative Commons a lot of the images. And I decided I'd try and show what's left behind if we lose what's in danger. So this particular family is the Fabaceae, I think I'm saying it right. And that's the Kakabeg and the Kawhai family, and there's quite a few different species in it. And only about 23% of these are not threatened. So then I started playing with going, actually, I was chatting to a programmer friend, and I'm like, I need to remove 77% of my pixels. How would I do that in code? And he's like, and then I can use Photoshop. I'll just change the opacity down to 23%. Why am I overcomplicating things? So that's what I did. And I said, it's okay, but it's a little bit meh, it's not my best work. And then I started thinking more about our national icons and our New Zealandness, and thinking about souvenirs. I mean, we have tea towels with flora and fauna. We've had stamps, there's posters. There's even I'm sure you've all been into a fish and chip shop and seen the poster on the wall. There's all these Kiwiana things with images of wildlife that I could riff off. So I started doing some of these myself. So it's that scrolly effect again. So I'm showing you, the first one is what you see first, and then when you scroll up, you sort of see things fading out. So I put things into families, species into families, and then removed what was in danger, just to leave behind what was not threatened. So I did postcards for birds, the tea towel for fungi, got stamps for the lizards. I had to get permission from a photographer to use these photos. We don't actually have many images of our geckos and frogs. And the fish shop poster. We might just show you how it played out on a couple. So here's how it worked for the, I'm going down again, so you scroll up and they disappear. And for the plants, this wasn't so much souvenir, it was an album, but that related to what was in the story. Obviously, there's more data than just that, and I had to show some other charts, but what I tried to do is stick with the vanishing theme. So I made the not threatened nice and dark, and then I sort of made the rest really light, so you could almost feel how vulnerable and brittle is not the right word, but almost how vulnerable they are. And I tried to make my chart titles work quite hard, so make them quite descriptive. So, the bottom one, actually, I'll get the middle one. So within the threatened category, there are 431 species classed as critical. This is the last step before extinction. So I tried to make those titles tell the story a bit too. So for this project, I put feelings into figures by using pictures and things you're familiar with and that are linked to our Kiwiana identity. I use animation because I use things vanishing, and that captured the idea of loss, and I kept the colour very minimal on the other charts I did, and almost transparent for those species which are in danger. I'm going to move on to project 2. Now this is a really fun project. So we started this in 2022. It was actually Guy Espina's idea. I don't know whether you know him. He's been a journalist for years. He's spent a lot of time in the press gallery. He's hosted Morning Report. He's an amazing interviewer. He's interviewed a lot of politicians over the years. Now, we have an election coming up the following year. So it's 2022. We knew there's an election coming up in 2023. And through Guy, having done hundreds of interviews, he knows that politicians game interviews. And there's certain techniques they use to get little phrases into people's minds, or they have little tricks to avoid the tricky questions. And what we wanted to do, or the problem we were trying to solve, is how do we arm the public to understand that? I mean, you can't start every interview going, okay, in this interview you should look out for this and this. But we thought if we did a project which taught people the tricks of the particular politicians they would be listening to on heavy repeat over the next few months, it would be a public service, and people would be able to make more informed decisions about what they were hearing and, who they wanted to vote for. So the inspiration for it came from this. This is a New York Times piece on Tucker Carlson. And what that piece did is it looked at the way he used his language. He used they and you, and he tried to instill fear into his audiences with his use of language. It was pretty cool. It was hundreds of shows, and they just pulled out these little bits and showed through repetition how much he used that trick. So the insight was that text analysis of interviews could unearth those little go-to strategies for dodging questions, and they could also show the topics on heavy repeat and the little phrases that they try to seed in. I remember when Labour came in, they had 9 years of neglect. You know, there's a whole lot that people, or the coalition of chaos, you've all heard those phrases that politicians, they will pepper them into media interviews in the hope that it will get pick up and become a sort of a thing that sticks in people's mind. And so the strategy was to analyse lots of months of media interviews with the leaders and highlight the tricks and repeats. So we picked 4 shows. We had Morning Report, TV NZ Breakfast, TV3 Breakfast, and Mike Hosking's show. And so we stuck to those 4, and every week we recorded the interview. We used a transcription service, Otter, to transcribe it. Otter's great with American accents, not so good with New Zealand. I think the best one was they translated Jacinda Ardern to just under a June. So after the transcription was done, you had to go through and you manually go through every interview and manually clean it up. It was a bit of work. And we outputted those to a text file, and then we pulled those into R. And I used the Quantita package. I'd never done any text analysis before, so I just went through the tutorials with the Quantita package and learnt heaps. It was great. And set up basic code to look at top words, keywords, lexical diversity. That's how many unique words each person used, consecutive word patterns, and then key phrases. And I set up an R Markdown file. I think that's what you call it. It's the one that pumps out a PDF. That's how little I know about stuff. Because I wanted to get a weekly report so I could keep an eye on things, because I knew we planned to do this for several months, because I'd said initially to Guyon and my editor, we need a decent body of work to be able to say this is what they do, so we want at least 6 months. So every week I wanted to be able to look at what was going on. Here's, again, something that has never seen the light of day outside RNZ. This is my weekly report. So I was kind of giving the basics of how many interviews there were done, and then I was going, okay, what's your top word? Now you can sort of see, if you look at Luxon's, you can kind of see a little pattern starting already. I mean, he uses no, 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 no. Really? What? And Jacinda Ardern, you can see people. She has a phrase, of course. She uses that quite a lot. So you could see patterns from the beginning. The other things I was looking for were the little phrases they use over all the interviews. So I did this for over all interviews, and I'd also do it for just that week of interviews. And I'd look right down the bottom of this list to see if they're trying to seed any little terms, any little phrases into the world. And I also looked for what we call bridging terms. So there's a technique that people are trained in, especially politicians when they get media training, to, if they get a question they don't want to answer, they're taught the block and bridge technique. So you block by acknowledging the question. So I hear you. I absolutely hear what you're saying. And then you use a phrase which is called the bridge to jump over that awkward place and go, yeah, but what I can tell you, and then you move the conversation to something you're comfortable talking about. And that's a really important thing, because we wanted people to be able to see what questions the politicians won't answer. So I had all these different, I had different phrases I was looking for in the block and bridge, and I kept adding to them. The more interviews I listened to, I picked up more. So you can see here, Christopher Luxon said, as I said, or as I've said, and Jacinda Ardern, as I say, was one of hers. Christopher Luxon, he loved this one. The reality is, but I hear your frustration, but the reality is, so that was quite interesting. And then I would go through and look at, if I'd pick something up when I was cleaning the transcription up, So addicted to spending was one of Christopher Luxon's one, and I was looking at keywords in context. And then I would sometimes do a search to see if that got picked up by the media. So you can see here, we've got RNZ, we've popped it in one of our stories. There's Stuff's done it as well. I think there were quite a few mentions of addicted to spending. So he used it in an interview, and then it turns up in an article or goes into headlines. And then I tried looking at how I was going to visualise this. So, and I was like, I want to show repetition, because repetition is one of the tools I use a lot. But I kind of did this and I thought, this isn't working at all, because the focus is just on their faces. I mean, the pictures take over. The numbers there of how many times they said the word tax, this was made up data. I was just playing with how I'd visualise it at the moment. But it didn't really, I felt like I hadn't nailed how to show it. And this is what I ended up doing. So each box is an interview, and I stripped the face out. We don't need to see Christopher Luxon's face a million times over, or Jacinda Ardern's, or it was Labour leaders, because halfway through Jacinda quit, and we got Chris Hipkins, which we freaked out about for a while, going, oh my goodness, we've done how many months of this, and oh my goodness, they've changed. Well, how are we going to do it? And it's fine, we can carry on. The other thing I did here is I really, you'll see I have a mouse over on the 37 one. Now, I didn't really need to go tax, 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 tax. I could have just said tax and the number of times it was used, but I actually thought this reinforced, like it really drives home how repetitious the use is. And here's one which shows the opposite. It's a lack of repetition. So this was farming. It just didn't really rate a mention from either party. So if I was a farmer, I'd be looking at this going, not that important. I'm going to click on this, take you to the story. So again, I was really trying to push the idea of repetition, and I went overboard on this one. So I've got this thing here where you can see how often it was used. I've got a bar chart here, and I chucked sound in because why not? We're radio. I had the sound files because I'd recorded either the audio or the TV.
Kiwis on average incomes and good jobs, but what I call the squeeze middle that just cannot get ahead. To help the squeeze middle, that are called in that squeeze.
Is that
the squeezed middle with the squeeze middle? If you're in the squeeze middle of New Zealand, the squeeze middle in New Zealand. Kiwis on average incomes and good jobs.
And rinky dink.
Doing a rinky dink cost, not rinky dink band-aid. Rinky dink rather than a rinky dink band-aid cost of living payment going to dead people.
And I also did it for, if you listen to a lot of Jacinda Ardern,
Of course I do. And of course Wester, of course. And of course I do, of course. Because of course, we did it, of course. And of course. Well, keep in mind, of course, that there's, of course we don't. Of course we will take lessons from that.
and you can see if you down here, she did, of course, in pretty much every interview I had recorded with her. It was pretty, and outcomes, and we still hear outcomes from Christopher Luxon.
Getting worse outcomes. Outcomes being much worse. Delivering improved outcomes. That's not getting any improved outcomes. Look dispassionately at the outcomes, and outcomes really matter because the outcomes matter because we're not getting improved outcomes, high outcomes, and that's what we're all about.
So, yeah, I really did try to push that. I mean, I wasn't trying to push a feeling across with this. I was trying to push the vibe of repetition, and that repetition is a tool that they are using to get around or to get things into our mind. So I use sound, really repetitious visuals, and then I use those info pop-ups just to sort of really reinforce that. So that's a couple of projects I've done, but there's lots of other ways to show emotions with data visualization. So there's lots of techniques you can use. You could use colour. So warm, vibrant colours will evoke emotion. If you use dark colours, it'll make you feel a different way. We could use really transparent colours like I did, or pastels. You can use size. I mean, you can make something ridiculously big and something very, very small, just to show a difference in scale. And that's going to make you feel something, especially if it's the small thing is something dear to you and that's up against something massive. Repetition, like I've just talked about, can be really powerful as well. You can use animation. It doesn't have to be a still bar chart. It can be animated. You can use sound. And that, I've got it later. Skip. And the other thing you can use is pictures. You don't have to stick to a scatter plot or a bar chart. You can use pictures, and it can be a really powerful way of making things, making people go, actually, that's not a number, that's not a statistics, that is something real. Photographs, even more. Doing something unexpected can be really, really good as well. So I'll show you one of those in a minute. Using video, we're in the TikTok generation. Why does everything have to be a chart? I mean, some of the best communication I've seen of data is people doing TikTok videos. I have a think about how would I tell the story in a video when you've got things, if you've got the opportunity. I mean, maybe you're publishing something, but maybe you want to promote that. Maybe a TikTok video with some visual way of showing things would be good. I was going to do one the other day. There was this, bizarrely, a government standard was for how deep a creek could be before it needed to be fenced off, was based on the height of a red band gumboot. If it's a stream you can jump across, then you need to fence it, or if the water goes over the top of your red band gumboot, you should fence it. So I was all ready to get a pair of red bands and go out to a stream and get our video person to, have me testing, walking through streams, to go, is this one that should be fenced off? Oh, it's gone over my red bands. It's now been changed, by the way, to 30, I think it was 30 centimetres. So they've actually given it a proper height, not just based on a gumboot. And music, I mean, if you're going to do video, then the music you choose can also, and music can convey so much emotion. Here's one, and this uses colour as a technique. This isn't my work. I've tried to put some examples here just to show you different things. I love this because it's colour. It's almost drawing a picture as well. I mean, it looks like blood falling down. And it's unexpected. You don't normally expect a chart to be flipped up this way. So it tells us, I mean, even at a glance, you can sort of understand what they're trying to get across. You'll probably all be familiar with the climate stripes. I mean, that just uses colour and repetition, but we all understand it. I think it's a very, very clever piece of visual communication. This is one which is about gun deaths, and I think it uses a colour a little bit, and it uses repetition. There we go. There's no sound on this, it's just visual animation. The idea is the stolen years, so how many more years they may have lived had they not been killed by a gun. And it starts off quite slow, and there we go. So this was for 2018. And you just get this overwhelming sense of, just the loss from gun death. It's just going, holy crap, when's it going to stop? Oh, oops. This is a beautiful one. So she does some really cool stuff. So this is years with a female head of state using a drawing, and it's what's not there which really sticks out, which is the United States. I mean, but by using a part of a human body, we're actually feeling a little more connected to it. And this is another one from here as well. For every $1 a white man earns, and it looks at how that decreases. So this is photography. But again, it sort of helps make it a little more real. I'm not sure if it gives emotion so much, but it does kind of hit home a little harder than a bar. I mean, you could have done this in a bar chart, but this is impacting more. Here's me. This is again something that I was playing. I did a project on buses, which I talked to Thomas about, thank you. And I was playing with how do I show, because I don't know whether you remember, a year or so back, there was a lot of bus cancellations. It drove me crazy. I was left at the bus stop so many times, and I was looking at ways I could try and capture that feeling of waiting, because we were waiting. So many buses cancelled. Sometimes I was waiting for an hour for a bus. So I had played with the idea of putting images in there. I never did it in the end because I decided it was a little too complicated for what I wanted to do. But if I'd done a simpler thing, I think it would have worked. Pictograms. You don't have to be really, really good at drawing, an amazing illustrator, or have an incredible photography library. Pictograms can be really simple, and they reinforce its people. So these are just ones I've done. The animated one was looking at a COVID outbreak that we had back in the beginning around a school, and how that played out over time, and how many people got infected from one case. But you still sort of, because you've put a pictogram in there, it hits home. Now, you don't want to do everything in pictograms, but they can be useful. Here's a pictogram that I did during COVID. I'm not sure it works so great, but I was trying to show of the ICU beds that we had, there's always, some are being used for operations and stuff. There was always around 25 that were kind of in reserve for emergencies. And I was trying to show, because we were quite worried at that time, whether we had enough ICU beds to cope with the wave of COVID that we were quite scared we'd have. So I was trying to show just how many of those sort of 25 beds that were, reserved for emergencies were being used by COVID-19 patients. And at this stage, there was just 3 of them. And we never really went into that danger zone, which was lucky, because we avoided that first strain of COVID pretty much. Sound. This one's really interesting. So this is from the Las Vegas shooting. Again, it's a New York Times thing. And I'll play it. So that's the speed of the gun, the fire from the gun. And what was really interesting is above that, they've got a video which was actual audio, and you could hear the screams of people, and it was quite chaotic. And you'd actually think that would be more upsetting, but it's the one where they stripped everything out and you can just hear the gunshots that kind of hits home about how fast the gun was firing. And I still find that very unusual, that by stripping everything out, they made it more impactful, because you'd think the screams would be the things that would affect you more. Here's a great, this was on TikTok. You may have seen it. I absolutely love it.
The scale of $1 billion is really crazy. So let's say 1 grain of rice is equivalent to 100K, and 10 grains of rice would be then 1 million. Well, how much is 1 billion? So my Saturday night consisted of counting 10,000 grains of rice, one by one, just to show you guys how much $1 billion is. Of course I filmed it, and of course I time-lapsed it, and this is playing at, I don't even know, God knows how fast it's playing at, but... So now I'm proud to present to you the results. That is $1 billion, where each grain of rice is worth 100K. Look how much rice this is,
But wait,
guys.
it gets better.
That's crazy. I just bought you like a Lamborghini right here, and I didn't even notice it was gone. Here's a $5 million house in California, and oh look, I still have all this money. Well, a lot of you guys asked me, well, how much does Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos have in terms of rice? So that was my mission, and I went to Costco. I got the rice, I brought it home, and once I brought it home, I went to work. I also want to say that I have 5 families that are going to take this unused rice, so it's totally not wasteful. Okay, so the moment you've been waiting for, 100K, 1 million, 1 billion. Jeff Bezos has 122 of these, or 58 pounds of rice. If each grain of rice was 100K. Like, look how big this is, guys. I'm gonna show you the scale here. I'm gonna put a keyboard in just for fun. Look how deep that goes. That's insane. This is Jeff Bezos' new house. That's $145 million in LA. And then, oh my God.
All right, I love that. I mean, it's not so much feeling, but it's such a good way to communicate. And this is why I'm saying, think about video as well when you're thinking about communicating. This is another thing, I don't know how many times I've written, that is the equivalent to X Olympic swimming pools, but showing different ways, like coming up with different unexpected ways of showing a number can be cool. So this was 500,000 COVID deaths in the US. Again, this is National Geographic, and it's just quite beautiful illustrations. But they've compared it to something a little unexpected. So it'll be like losing the inhabitants of Atlanta, Georgia. Sorry. And then the next one on that side is 500,000 caskets would stretch. I mean, this is probably meaning more to you if you know US and geography probably doesn't mean that much to me, but I think this is really cool to sometimes trying to put things in perspective is trying to bring it back to things people might be familiar with. And this is, I look for inspiration everywhere. And this one I found on Twitter, and this came from a guy playing with DALL-E. So this is from an AI image generator. And he put a few prompts in. I think one of them was a bar graph with smoke and fire, and the other one was ghosty bar graph. These are really cool. Like, if you actually had a story to tell, that suited it. It's really cool. So I look for inspiration everywhere. And, and again, I chuck this back in here because talking about bringing feeling in, the eyes, using eyes, I know it seems cliche, but look how powerful that is, that gorilla. Like, they've made those dots bigger than the rest of the dot. They've done that on purpose. And that gorilla is staring right at you. So it's a really cool technique. If you're working with a designer or a visualizer, maybe you're not a designer, but you're working with someone and you want them to do the best job with your data, give them the context. What story is your data telling? And tell them what the important bits are. And then tell them what's the one thing you want people to remember the next day about it, because that will help them understand what's really important. Tell them how it's going to be consumed. Is it going to be printed? Is it going to be on a website? So they know what they're doing. And then, and this is maybe the most important thing, if you have something you've seen that works well, even if it's completely different, share it with them and explain what you like about it. Is that they can't see what's in your head. So if you have something in your mind already, then share it. Otherwise, you'll get something back from them completely different, and you'll be like, oh, it's not really what I wanted. But make sure to check in on the final product when you're working with designers. This is an actual example of what a designer did, and this is what the data says. So bless designers, and I say that as having been one in the past, but sometimes they just want things to look balanced. I'm jumping. That's supposed to be 0%, for goodness sakes. So check in on it. This does look lovely, though. It looks lovely. Don't know what it's trying to tell. It's okay to have fun. Data doesn't have to be boring. So this is a fun project I did where I had Joel, who's great, and I had a CO2 meter, and I'd looked at CO2 levels in relation to infection risks. So I came up with a Dr. Joel meter where if it was good, he was like this, or it was average, down or completely down. And we put that into our story. We got him in, we took some photographs, and we got him to give the docjolemeter to some CO2 readings that we'd taken in different places. And I was working with I'm very lucky to work with an incredible visuals person who always improves what I do. And so Cole, the visual person, said, actually, can you walk out of frame on this one? And I think it's great. I love it. I think Joel added in the being violently ill. That's his bit of flair. And this is another one I did with the same visuals person. I was looking at food exports and how much of our food we eat here versus what gets exported. And this is a pie chart that actually works, by the way, and it's a pie. But I sort of talked to Cole about the idea, and he's like, let's make the food dance. And I think it really captures attention. And just to show you, this was what I showed Cole, and this is kind of my idea. So that's where my idea started, and this is, working with good designers. And I'm a designer, but there's much better designers than me, and I get to work with them, which is amazing. That's where it ended up. I actually had the art director telling me where to bite that apple. So what I'd like you to take away from this talk, because I'm nearly done, is a visual representation of your numbers can make it easier for some people to understand. It really does help. Feelings can make facts stick. And data does not have to be dry. You can have fun with it. And that's me.
Okay, so we have some time for questions. Hello people on the internet, they won't be able to hear the questions, but maybe you could repeat them.
I'll try.
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm really interested in the way you work because you need time for some thought and creativity. But when it's your job and you've got deadlines, how do you balance that? Do you have 10 ideas on the go at once, or are you just very good at focusing and being creative?
Okay, that's a great question about how I find time and what my workflow is like. So I do tend to have quite a few things on the go at once. And I'm part of the in-depth team at RNZ, so I don't have to do daily news. I get time to look at a project and spend a bit more time in it. So some people have to do a story every day. I might do a story once a month, and I really get to dig in on it. And that is an absolute gift. And I am always feeling that I am in such a lucky position because there's a lot of stories out there that wouldn't get told if there wasn't the job that I've got, which gives me the ability to look at it. Having said that, sometimes I do stuff outside of hours. So the one with the species, I just loved that. I was playing, I'd be waiting to pick up my kid and clear cutting things in the parking lot of my car. And anyway, so it's a bit of both. I personally do have a lot of leeway. But I also work a bit outside of hours. And I think it's a problem. It's why we probably have so few data journalists in New Zealand, is because organisations need to commit time. Data takes a lot longer to do because you're getting the data, cleaning the data, analysing the data, and then you've got to do the rest of the reporting job on top of that. So you've got to interview people, talk to people, you've got to write a story, you've got to do the visuals. So it is time consuming, and that's why there's only about 4 or 5 of us around.
You're with RNZ as an audio medium, visuals, and unless you're involved in television too, how do visuals come into it?
That's a great question. So I was just asked, I'm at a radio station, so how do I do data visualisation? And to be honest, when I got a shoulder tap to apply for the job, I was going, why does a radio station need a data person whose strength is visualisation? So Radio New Zealand now likes to call themselves RNZ. the R stands for radio, but it's RNZ. And we've got a website, which that's a lot of my stuff is digital. We do a lot of video stuff, but I have tried to use sound in some of my data journalists, so there is some cool sonification stuff. There was one I did about CCTV cameras, and there's this stretch of Fort Street where there's, I think it's like 20 cameras in 100 metres, so to put that across on radio, I had my microphone and I was walking down the little stretch of street and I was talking about, there's a KFC here, there's a bar here, and then I was playing beeps every time I passed, every time there was a CCTV camera. So that was a way to get the idea of just how many cameras there were on the radio. But it is really hard doing data on the radio. Sometimes I do vox pops, like I might go, I go down to the street and I go, for the food project, I'll go, what percentage of milk do you think gets exported? And I'll get people to guess. And sometimes that can be a cool way to bring numbers in, because there's nothing more boring than a whole list of numbers on the radio. I struggle to keep focus, so I really do try to make my data journalism on radio interesting. And it's hard.
So I have one about the cancellations, which is one of the issues is making good news also newsworthy. The cancellations both in Auckland and Wellington have gone away, and you don't see this reported. I didn't in fact realise how few there were in Wellington until I looked at the GTFS feed a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, I did. I had actually planned to do a follow-up on that, but in between it being terrible and improving, some of the routes had changed. It was going to be a lot of work, and good news stories.
I mean, it's a real problem. In other areas of journalism, it's probably the other way around. If you look at miracle cures, the miracle cure gets reported in the ordinary news, and then the fact it doesn't work gets reported in the business news. Because the stock price,
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And we now have... thanks for...